This is the Digital Factory podcast. I'm John Brunner. Today I'll be talking with the person responsible for the world's largest 3D printing operation, one that turns out 500,000 3D printed parts every day. That's Align Technology, which makes Invisalign orthodontic treatments. Align is perhaps the canonical example of a business that's driven by manufacturing technology, and especially additive manufacturing. But it's not as simple as just printing a bunch of aligners. In order to really unlock the value of 3D printing, Align has surrounded it with a number of other cutting-edge manufacturing technologies, including human-guided generative design, artificial intelligence, and automation. We'll get into that discussion in just a second, but first I want to remind you that the Digital Factory Conference is coming back to Boston on May 7th. The CEO of Align Technology will be there, as well as the CEOs of Spirit AeroSystems, PTC, Formlabs, Desktop Metal, Onshape, Bright Machines, the CTOs of GE and Baker Hughes, the CIO of FedEx, the head of manufacturing of Ford, the head of Fusion 360 at Autodesk, and a lot of other brilliant people who are driving their businesses with digital manufacturing. To sign up, visit thedigitalfactory.com and use the code PODCAST for a discount. The Digital Factory is brought to you by Formlabs, which makes powerful, accessible 3D printers that scale from desktop prototyping into full production, and recently introduced the groundbreaking Form 3 stereolithography printer. My guest today is Emery Wright, who's the Senior Vice President for Global Operations at Align Technology. Emery, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Align Technology's core product is Invisalign aligners, which are an alternative to the metal braces that a lot of us had as kids. And you use 3D printing in order to fabricate these. And you're often described as the world's largest user of 3D printing. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing and about the scale of your operation?
Sure. One of the ways we look at it is, when you talk about us being the biggest 3D printing company on the planet, one way to measure that is the number of machines we have, but really it's our business is all make to order. So everything that we make is different. Every patient that we design treatments for and make appliances for are different. And each of the appliances in a particular patient's treatment is different. And so on a daily basis, we make approaching 500,000 unique parts every day using 3D printing technology. Having worked for the company for quite some time and seeing this evolve over time, when I think about that number, it doesn't necessarily shock me on a day-to-day basis. But when you stand back and think about 500,000 parts every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that's just a lot of 3D printing, a lot of digital. It's a lot of data movement. It's a lot of data manipulation. It's a lot of digital manufacturing.
Right. For a lot of people who have used 3D printing and a lot of these digital technologies, either as part of a prototyping process or as a very small run production process, that's an extraordinary number, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people still use the 3D printing as a prototyping process, and they run a few parts, or they'll run a build overnight and look at the parts the next day. We work to have our machines, at like a 95% uptime. So these machines are constantly printing.
So describe a little bit about the process itself. Are you actually directly printing the aligners on the 3D printers, or is it part of a larger kind of hybrid process?
Yeah, not yet. So, if you go back just a little bit into the kind of end-to-end process, the first side of our, call it our digital manufacturing, is the digital design. So we get typically a scan of patients' teeth and some instructions from our customers, orthodontists or dentists. And we use that information to create a digital treatment plan that looks at where the patient's teeth are today, and then where they will be at the end of treatment. And then we create the staging of what each stage of treatment will look like. So how teeth move over time from stage to stage. There's some iterative process there in the design where customers will review that through a web portal, and they can make changes themselves. They can ask us to make changes on their behalf. But ultimately, once they approve that treatment, then we go into the physical manufacturing part where we actually print a mold for every stage in that treatment. So there's an upper arch, a lower arch, upper lower jaw. So a mold for each of those for every stage of treatment. And then we use a proprietary plastic that we thermoform over that mold. And then we cut the actual appliance. There's some plastic waste. We trim that plastic on the mold. We remove the appliance from the mold. The mold then becomes waste. The 3D printed part becomes waste, and we post-process the actual appliance itself, polish it, clean it, and then package it and ship it. So we don't yet directly print the appliance, but that is an area that we're working and investing heavily in. Because that's kind of the next leapfrog, if you will, is to directly manufacture, directly print that appliance.
That's a pretty complex process that you've just described. Is it pretty automated, the trimming of the plastic and the post-processing of the thermoformed aligner?
Yeah, I'd say it's the major portions of the process are highly automated. There still is a lot of labor content in the process, given that it's a custom device. And some of the geometries of the treatments that we do are difficult to 3D print or difficult to form over the mold and trim. There are some manual parts of the process and material handling and maintenance of equipment and things of that nature. And post-processing is also an area that there's some manual labor, but the vast majority of the process is automated from, once the customer approves the treatment file, our enterprise system essentially prepares the data. It queues up the treatments to be printed. It lays them out in the most efficient manner amongst all of the machines that we have. So it knows which machine's idle and ready to build, et cetera. So all of that, all the data management is automatic. From once we get a mold, there's some manual work that happens and some movement to the next step of the process, which is the forming and trimming part. Forming and trimming all happens in an automated fashion. We use both kind of industrial milling to trim as well as laser. There's a lot of data management in doing that. So we access in real time the treatment file, so the design file, the CAD file, if you will, to get for every stage of treatment, where exactly do we need to cut the appliance from the mold. And there's a lot of vision systems incorporated to make sure that we have the exact orientation of the part and we can accurately cut that, do that automated cutting.
So what you're describing there is really sophisticated. That you're actually referring to the CAD model for the aligner in determining the tool path for the cutting process to trim off the excess. And then you're also using an automated inspection system as well to both orient the part and confirm the final product.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and it's all real time, and it all access. That original design, that original CAD file drives everything throughout the entire process.
Now let's talk about that original CAD model for a second, because you're starting with pretty complex models of people's teeth. These aren't just parametric models of a mechanical device. So are these scans of people's mouths, or are they scans of impressions of mouths?
So the majority nowadays are actually are scans, digital scans from our intraoral scanner or another brand intraoral scanner that we've qualified. Most of them come from our own scanner. We do have a fair amount of product that comes from a physical impression. So this is a PVS material. It's kind of a rubbery material. Most people have had an impression taken at one point in their life, so they know what that looks like. It's not very comfortable or pleasant. But we actually developed a CT technology to scan that impression and create a physical model, a very accurate physical model of teeth that's very similar to an intraoral scan. So something we would get directly. So that's another part of our process that we have that's effectively fully automated.
So, I mean, anyone who's used a 3D scanner knows that they can be sort of frustrating, and what you wind up with is a model that has a lot of imperfections that can be a little difficult to dial in and relate back to the fundamental physical thing that you scanned. How do you approach that? What's the workflow like once you get, the 3D scan? Are there humans involved in the process, or is that automated as well?
Yeah, it's a large portion of it's automated, but there are certainly when you scan an impression, there are a small number of artifacts you get just from the scanning process. Although I would say that the algorithms we've developed over time are really good. I mean, we don't have too many issues if you start with a kind of a clean model, if you will, or a clean impression. There's all sorts of physical artifacts you get in impressions from teeth. Either there's things called double impression where the material is not fully set, but it gets moved, and so you kind of get kind of this ghost image of teeth. There can be air bubbles in the impression that don't get picked up, so they look like actual physical part of the tooth, but it's really not. So there's some artifacts that we haven't worked out of the system, and so we have humans that use our proprietary software to go and clean those artifacts up. There is a large degree of automation to identify things that we know are not real tooth anatomy, and those get cleaned up automatically.
And how is the treatment itself designed? Is the software taking a model of the teeth, identifying the the final alignment, and then generating the intermediate steps, or does a human dentist kind of design the final alignment and specify the steps that go into it?
A large portion of it, again, is automated in our system. And we've done about 6 million treatments or patients that have gone through treatment or in treatment. So we have a huge database of treatments that have treated out or have substantially treated out, where we have been able to determine what movements work well in which sequence, and we essentially we've developed some machine learning to go figure out how do we move teeth most effectively in treatments, and so that is integrated into our algorithms to where when we have a starting material, so the very the initial position of teeth, we're able to with a few clicks of a button to create a initial final position that's pretty close to where we need teeth to be. And this algorithm takes into account orthodontic norms. So there's a set of kind of established norms on angulation of teeth, inclination of teeth, the orientation of teeth relative to their neighbors, and the interdigitation of the upper and lower arch, all things of that, a lot of aesthetics, a lot of function that's worked into the algorithm that is fairly automated. What we haven't been able to automate yet, and we are currently working on it, is some of the I'll say more customer specific things that are really relevant only to them. It's a little bit of their philosophy or their style on how they think a treatment should look. So an example, maybe one customer likes a broader or wider arch, and other customers might want a more narrow arch. So that's something that's specific to that customer that then gets modified by a technician using our software.
Wow, I never knew that as an orthodontic customer, you could actually specify something about the final aesthetic that you're getting out of the treatment. Are there any kind of stylistic requests that you get a lot and generally have to decline?
Typically, there are things that some of our customers might ask for that we know are not predictable. But we try not to get in the way of the treating orthodontist or dentist. It's it's their treatment, it's their patient. We're really just a kind of simplified tool that they use, right? And we of course, because it's digital and because we have a lot of data, we're able to know a lot more about how teeth move using plastic than anyone ever knew about how teeth move with wire and brackets or anything else. But it's they are particular oftentimes in their approach, and so we suggest and we try to share what we know, but ultimately they get to make the decision.
That's really interesting because there are not a lot of these machine learning systems in place right now in production environments that operate on CAD models. So are you actually taking satisfaction with the treatment or the outcome of the treatment as the dependent variable, and then using the machine learning to sort of take CAD models of treatments and predict outcomes from them?
So there's some of that. I mean, we're still I would say we're kind of in the infancy of machine learning right now. We certainly have enough data, but as you mentioned, there's not a lot of people who are using it in this manner, and so there's it's kind of it needs to be invented, if you will. It's not just applying some machine learning that's done on consumer data or something like that, right? So a lot of what we do is we study what works and what doesn't work in certain situations, and we design features into protocols and into the actual appliance itself based on the learning of what worked and what didn't work, and then those get kind of packaged and applied to cases as we treat them. The end goal is really to be able to take the beginning material and do that kind of on the fly assessment of that treatment, where teeth are going to move, and ultimately apply that to the treatment kind of dynamically. There's some of that goes on certainly today, but there's a long way for us to go, I think, before it is it's the futuristic kind of machine learning.
I think it's a really cool example because there's this belief that, data can be this incredibly valuable currency, and that if you are a company that has managed your data effectively and that's developed an enormous data set over some time doing business, that this can be extraordinarily valuable. And there aren't that many good examples of it. So it's a really cool one, sort of how you've been able to take this customer database and and learn across it like this.
I think we're just at the beginning. I think we have a long way to go and a lot of opportunity for us to leverage it even more. We're building great capability in machine learning and artificial intelligence, not only just on the 3D model, but also in our consumer data and things of that nature. Kind of marrying all those things in an end-to-end system is really kind of our vision. Based on our experience and our data, we'll be able to be the most predictable kind of treatment methodology because it's digital.
I'd love to learn a little bit about how you introduce these new technologies in production, because you're head of operations, and people who are in charge of operations sometimes have a little bit of an adversarial relationship with people who want to introduce new technologies to production environments. You can't have the factory go down, and you can't mess up the process. How do you manage that? How do you, when you're looking at something like a new machine learning model for driving the development of aligners, or a new 3D printing process or something like that? Do you have guidelines in your mind for how you introduce new technologies in production?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we follow. We're a little bit different in that we are constantly changing. So I've been with the business for 18 years, and I think we've turned over our technology platform in manufacturing probably every 2 years, maybe every 3 years on some level, usually pretty substantially. Getting whether it's big improvements in cost or throughput improvements, or just much better quality of the output, right? So we kind of, as a business, we kind of grew up constantly changing. So it's not as big of a hassle. I know we were talking about in past jobs, new technology could cripple the production process. We usually, as we're developing, whether it's a new algorithm or if it's a new physical, like when we went from industrial milling to laser trimming, right? As an example, we build a prototype. We have a pretty detailed kind of list of test parts, if you will, that test all sorts of severe anatomies and all the extremes. And we developed that using that test bed. And once we prove that we're kind of a equivalent, or let's just say we have feasibility, then we start to kind of scale and we validate the system and our process, and then we'll run that one line, because we're very modular in our production lines. We will run that one line for several months and get thousands and thousands of data points to say, hey, is this achieving what we thought it would achieve? And then once that's the case, then we roll it out in a phased approach through all production. Really, our production process is constantly in flux. It's constantly changed over to new, either it's new algorithms or new platforms or what have you.
So it sounds like whereas scale is sometimes an impediment to, introducing something new and experimenting, you're actually able to leverage your scale in order to make it possible to experiment.
I think that's very true. I think it's a great way to put it. I think because it's all digital and because of the kind of background system and how it's all tied together, although that in many cases can be an impediment, it actually helps us because we have so much data and so much knowledge about what each thing does and how the variables interact that we can avoid some of the trial and error that you see in many businesses.
So as you've introduced these new technologies, how has the product changed in terms of, the physical appliances that you're sending out or the way that they're delivered to your customers?
So I think certainly speed is something that continues to increase to where, we're able to deliver it much faster, as the design process gets better and we understand more about customers and integrate some of that into, the algorithms through machine learning. That shortens that time. So cycle times are something that we've dramatically improved over the years. I think the complexity of treatments that we can do now have exponentially increased. So we're far more complex. Down to we're actually treating kids as young as 6 years old, 7 years old, who they're actually growing at the same time that we're removing teeth. So that gets more complex. The number of features that we're adding into the appliance itself, whether it's a shape in the aligner that helps us apply a force system most accurately, or whether it's a feature that helps coordinate jaw growth. Mm-hmm. You kind of, it's almost the sky's the limit. We're able to do these things. Again, it's because of the number of cases that we've done and the amount of data that we have that we can rely on to help develop those things and quickly get those to market.
So to go back to the scale and your 3D printing operation, can you tell us what kinds of machines you're actually running in production?
We're using stereolithography, right? So it's we're running we work with 3D Systems. And we use their kind of biggest kind of frame system, and we have multiple generations in our kind of in our factory. But anything that we do, none of it is off the shelf. Everything that we use is highly customized for us, whether it's like from a physical feature in the 3D printer, or whether it's some of the software algorithms that drive that printer. It's all kind of designed by us or specifically only for us, which really kind of gives us our advantage and our ability to run these machines as lean as we run them and as often as we run them, and at the efficiency at which we run them.
Are there any companies outside of your industry that you look to and admire in terms of what they're doing with digital manufacturing?
God, I wish there were more, to be honest. I mean, that's one of the challenges we've had, is that you can't look at what someone else did and apply it, because for instance, we have some third party automation firms and design firms that we've worked with on certain technologies, some vision technologies and toolpath type of things. And I mean, we burn through these vendors because they say they can't help us. They don't know how to solve the problems that we have. And so we really haven't had a lot of luck with that. There are some other analogs that we try to stay close to, like, for instance, hearing aids. Certain types of hearing aids use a kind of a very analog process to us, where they have designers that design, through a CAD program, the actual hearing aid itself. They take an impression of the ear, et cetera. And so they have some of the same struggles. And in the past, we've talked to many of them to just kind of share perspectives. But really, I think we're far enough along that there's not a lot of companies out there that we can model after.
So at this point in the program, I ask every guest who comes on about their favorite tool. So Emery, I'd love to hear from you about your favorite tool.
That's kind of a tough one. Yeah, I think the first thing that came to my mind when you said it was my imagination. I don't know if that's really a tool, but it is the one thing that helps drive a lot of new ideas and not just my imagination, but our team's imagination in our business. But if you're thinking about a physical tool, I would probably have to say my cordless kind of impact wrench is the thing I use the most around the house. So that's probably my favorite tool.
And kind of an overlooked home repair tool. A lot of people who have just used a drill to drive screws are maybe missing out on something profoundly better.
In a big way. Yeah, exactly. No, it's a life-changing experience if you go from one to the next.
Right. I made the switch just a couple of years ago, and I've never looked back.
Right.
Emery Wright, Senior Vice President of Global Operations at Align Technology. It's been a pleasure to speak today. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks a lot.
If you want to learn more about Align Technology, as well as other companies that are driving their businesses through manufacturing, come to the Digital Factory Conference in Boston on May 7th. The CEO of Align, Joe Hogan, will be there, as well as other CEOs and CIOs and CTOs and heads of manufacturing who are transforming their businesses with 3D printing, with artificial intelligence, with cutting-edge automation. You can get a discount when you register by going to thedigitalfactory.com and using the code PODCAST when you sign up. The Digital Factory podcast is brought to you by Formlabs, which makes professional desktop 3D printers. Formlabs recently introduced the Form 3, which is a major step forward in stereolithography. You can learn more about the Form 3 at formlabs.com. For the Digital Factory podcast, I'm John Brunner.